Thank you very much, President. Thanks, Bertie. Well, first of all, I'm not about to give you a presentation, sorry. First of all, I hope you've had a good day today. I think the theme of this year's conference, Managing Risk, is about as relevant a theme as you could have chosen. And certainly sitting in on the last presentation, I think you have a lot to think about. From my perspective, as you know from many of you listening to me speak at various different times, as far as I'm concerned, we're in a partnership at the moment preparing for an extraordinarily exciting but challenging period for the Irish dairy industry. We're meeting on a monthly basis in our Food Harvest Committee, planning for that growth, trying to anticipate problems so that we can solve them early, looking at the various different links in the supply chain from farmer to processor to exporter, trying to find weaknesses so we can seal them up. But of course there are, as you would have heard today, many, many variables in dairy markets that affect price, that will affect reputation potentially, and ultimately will affect the success and the pricing of our hopefully sustainable growth in this country over the next 7 or 8 years, but actually over the next 25 years in terms of where we take our dairy industry. And the people in this room are central to that story. And there's a couple of things that I'd like to talk to you about, because it's been actually an extraordinary year of change, of challenge, of opportunity, of positive outlook, as well as some scares. And I think it's no harm at conferences like this to reflect on what's been achieved and the decisions that have been made this year in the context of some of the other risk management that we need to get right between now and April 2015. First of all, of course, the biggest policy decision that I've been involved in this year has related to the CAP. By mid to the end of December, farmers and indeed co-ops will have clarity in terms of how Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 or direct payments and rural development programmes will actually work and how they'll be funded, levels of redistribution between farmers of single farm payment, and some of the other strategic things that are a main feature of this CAP that simply weren't there in the past. Strategic policy initiatives like improving the sustainability and environmental protection in our food production systems. And the Commission, you'll hear them talking about the 30-30 rule, which has nothing to do with 2030 or anything like that. What they mean by that is that 20% of direct payments, 30% of direct payments and 30% of rural development funds have to actually be now earmarked for environmental or sustainability purposes. And farmers will know what I mean by that in terms of the greening of the CAP in Pillar 1 and environmental rural development schemes, which you will be reading about in the coming weeks. Secondly, of course, we are in the business of generational change. If we are going to successfully deliver the kind of growth and expansion and innovation that we need over the next 10 to 15 years, well, then we need a generation of people who are ambitious, who are smart, who are well educated, and who know how to take on the complex challenges of producing an awful lot more food while at the same time meeting their obligations as regards sustainability and climate change and food security and so on. And we are investing heavily in training that new generation of farmer. And that's not to say that people in their 70s and 80s and in some cases 90s aren't good farmers as we speak. They are. But we still need to be training and preparing for a new generation to take over with perhaps a more ambitious approach than the current generation has been allowed to develop because of supply restrictions since the mid-80s. Thirdly, and I think probably most significantly, this CAP is a move away from the protectionism of the past, which when people initially consider that, they think it's a threat. But actually I think it's the opposite. I think the idea that we would be maintaining the kind of supply control, effective price supports into the future would essentially be taking the European Union in a different direction to the rest of the world. And in the medium term, that would have been a huge risk. Instead, what we are doing is trying to integrate the dairy industry within the European Union with the rapidly changing dairy industry in the rest of the world. From a pricing point of view, from an efficiency point of view, from a quality control and sustainability and safety point of view. And of course, Ireland is already used to that. And so we are perhaps better placed than the vast majority of other dairy producers for a shift towards a more globalized approach towards food production, which of course is going to provide practically all of the opportunity for the increased dairy output that many of you as farmers or as co-op members will look to take advantage of over the next 10 years. And then the final big difference, of course, is around flexibility. I mean, there was a time when 15 ministers sat around and hammered out a deal on CAP reform. It's a much more significant political challenge now to get agreement across the European Union. There's 28 countries involved and there's 3 European institutions involved. And so to get the thing over the line during the Irish presidency, we had to agree to actually factoring in options for countries to design their own CAP structures, while at the same time trying to keep a common market intact. And so since the agreement in July, we have moved towards or through a public consultation process, and now we are using the flexible tools that we negotiated at a European level to design a CAP that actually suits Ireland's ambitions for what we want to achieve from our agri-food sector over the next 7 years, which is the lifetime of the next CAP. And I think we got almost everything we looked for. And now we need to use that success to design a sensible system that can allow progressive, competitive farmers to grow and expand if they want to, but can also protect vulnerable farmers that may be in disadvantaged areas who don't have the capacity to gain significantly from the marketplace to actually stay on the land. Because my job, of course, isn't just about driving a business forward, it's also about maintaining rural Ireland in an acceptable fashion. So can I just talk about some of the things that I hope you've already discussed today, but maybe I can give you another perspective on. First of all, I think many of us got a real reality check in the first half of this year when literally Ireland ran out of fodder. It's never happened before that we have had to import grass into this country. Some people who weren't overly well informed suggested that maybe our herd had got too big and that we were growing too quickly, which ignores, of course, the fact that 15 or 20 years ago the beef herd was significantly bigger than it is now. The problem was we had an extraordinary weather pattern of 18 months of having not more than, I think, 2 or 3 days without rain. And the combination of that and, to be honest, a lack of management at farm level in some cases resulted in a shortage, and we had to, and I want to thank everybody here for their input and involvement in actually finding a way to bridge the problem, which we did in partnership with government using public money to import the equivalent of enough food for 6 million animals in a day. That was the volumes that we're talking about. But I think it was a real reminder that actually we should take nothing for granted, not even grass growth in this country, in the context of risk management. And I speak to Teagasc now regularly in terms of constantly assessing and auditing the state of fodder in terms of its quantity and its quality. And we will continue to do that now into the future. And we will continue to focus primary producers on ensuring that they treat silage like they would treat any other crop, and that they would plan for worst case scenario in terms of fodder storage going into each winter. The most important thing, in my view, that farmers and co-ops need to consider as we prepare for growth and expansion is actually around quality assurance and safety. We can do all the investment we want in terms of planning for an increased herd size, planning for increased output per animal in terms of feed conversion efficiency. We can open up markets in the Gulf states, in China, in North Africa, in Russia. But the reality is, if the reputation of the dairy industry in Ireland as being a premium producer of safe, consistent, high-quality food, if that is damaged in the future, the whole project gets undermined in a dramatic way. And so, to my mind, the most important building block here, or the most important foundation for growth, must be a guarantee, or as close to it as we can get, of safe, quality assured, audited farm production systems that can provide a certainty around safety which is matched by nobody else. And we have managed to move in that direction in quite a significant way. That is why big international food companies like Danone and Nestle and Abbott are continuing to invest heavily in Ireland in terms of infant formula production facilities, which is about the most sensitive dairy product that you can produce. But if that's going to continue, I think they will need more than the existing reputation to continue investing here. We will need to provide them with the data and the science and the benchmarks that we demand of our farmers to ensure that if we are in the premium business, which we now are, that we are producing premium raw materials to fuel that business. And that is why on the 11th of December we will be launching the Dairy Quality Assurance Scheme, which has taken about 2 years to get support and agreement across the sector on, which in itself I think says a lot. It's taken too long. But I think it was necessary perhaps to spend that period of time to actually reassure farmers that this is in their interest, rather than some ministerial initiative for the sake of it. But I can tell you, as somebody who has travelled a lot in terms of trying to open up new markets for Irish dairy product and indeed Irish beef, the most important issue is safety and quality assurance and the proof of it in terms of measurable benchmarks around that. And that has to become the norm across our sector, because there's 17,000 dairy farmers in Ireland. If 16,500 of those are pursuing an approach of excellence towards quality assurance and safety, but 500 aren't, that is a risk that we cannot and should not accept as an industry. And the cooperative movement have a real obligation to ensure that their members understand that, and I have an obligation to ensure that the resources are there to make sure that we can deliver on that, and we will do that. And you know the measurements that we're talking about. It's about disease levels, whether it's BVD, whether it's Iones, whether it's TB. It's about somatic cell count. It's about antibiotic use and antimicrobial resistance. Issues that will become consumer issues, if they're not already consumer issues in the future, that we need to be able to respond to with clear policy initiatives and indeed target setting that we actually meet on a monthly and annual basis. In terms of price volatility, I think we also need to do more in this area, particularly for the years 2015, 2016, 2017, when the new reality hits around milk production within the European Union. As I said earlier, there's no country planning for the kind of dramatic expansion that we're planning for. In fact, we will probably have more growth in our dairy industry in the first year post-quota than any other European country will have in the 5 years post-quota. I'm not aware that anyone is planning for more than a 15 to 17% growth except Ireland. And we're planning for that figure in the first year. So we don't know, in truth. Nobody knows. We can have an educated guess as to where dairy pricing will go over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. I think practically everyone who predicts dairy prices would suggest that there will be, in the medium to long term, a steady increase in dairy prices. But certainly it'll be a bumpy road along the way. There'll be peaks and there'll be troughs. And we need to try and insulate our industry and our farmers from that. We can't expect our farmers to be trading in dairy futures or to be hedging against dairy, short-term dairy price drops. But certainly our co-ops should be doing it. And more importantly than that, we can insulate our farmers and also insulate our clients, the people who buy our product, if we could actually lock in a portion of the milk that we produce and sell into agreed medium to long-term pricing models. That's already happening in a number of our co-ops, and in my view it should be happening in all of our co-ops. But that is a decision for you to make in terms of how you run your operations. But certainly, and we have spent hours and hours and hours in our department and outside our department talking about price volatility and how we can insulate Ireland from the effects of the peaks and troughs in that. And there are all sorts of policies that we could or should be pursuing, some of them more complex than others. But I think the basic relationship between a farmer and his or her co-op in terms of trying to lock in a significant proportion of their milk to a guaranteed price, particularly in the bridge years of 2015, 2016, in my view, is an essential component in that overall price volatility policy mix that we need to be talking about much more than we currently are. Although I do know there's a significant conversation on that issue happening internally within the industry at the moment. In terms of business efficiency, the other thing that I would say is that from a dairy farming point of view, I think perhaps the emphasis on growth sometimes potentially clouds the need for an efficiently run business. What we don't want to see in Ireland is inefficient businesses that aren't making very much money expanding dramatically in terms of producing more milk. We don't want bigger, inefficient companies. And so the focus for co-ops and for my department and for banks and for agricultural advisors has to be on helping farmers to run as efficient and as profitable a business first as they can, and then they plan for expansion in that context. And I think that is really important. If you look at some of the mistakes that New Zealand have made in their expansion programs, and let's not forget, back in the mid-80s, we produced the same amount of milk as New Zealand. We both produced 5 billion litres. We now produce a little bit more than that. They produce 19 billion litres of milk and dominate the traded world markets and set price for practically everybody else as well. But that journey hasn't been without its problems. And the debt levels that a lot of dairy farmers have in New Zealand are unsustainable or close to being unsustainable. And we need to ensure that from a debt management point of view and an investment management point of view, we learn some lessons from that. Because only 50% of Irish farmers have any debt at all, which is an extraordinary statistic given the debt levels that the rest of society have. So we are in a reasonably good place going into this period of growth and investment and expansion, but we need to do it in a way that is measured and in a way where farmers know what they're getting into and that they plan and get assistance in planning for a business model for that growth and expansion. And I see that incurring of debt as a huge potential risk to farmers, particularly even though many people may not believe it here, but particularly at a time when banks actually want to give farmers a lot of money. Because don't forget, farmers have great security for banks. Land prices in Ireland are only going in one direction. And so it's a very comfortable bet to actually lend heavily to the agricultural sector, particularly at the moment, given the excitement in that sector. The other thing I'd say, just because I'm here at the ICOS conference, which is maybe a little bit more controversial, and that is that there does need to be a debate in terms of consolidation across the industry. we do need to scale up because we are going to be competing against companies like Fonterra and others that are represented here. And the reality is that even though the Irish Dairy Board, in my view, do a great job in terms of achieving economies of scale as regards exports, I do think we need to constantly ask ourselves the question, as farmers, as people who own our own co-ops, are we self-critical in terms of ensuring that we have the most efficient production models that can support and guarantee farmers' incomes into the future? Or in some cases, are we simply too small on our own? And I think you've already seen a movement towards some partnerships and some consolidation, but I think that that conversation, which seems to be a sort of an awkward one, and I don't know why, because we're all in this together. Well, certainly you're all in it together as dairy producers. And I think we need to have a more open discussion on that partnership and consolidation discussion in the context of having to find markets for all of this extra milk outside of Ireland, and most of it, as I say, outside of the European Union as well. If you go to China, or if you go to Saudi Arabia or the UAE or Qatar, they are looking for a large volume of product and they're looking to talk to one person around the management of that, as opposed to dealing with multiple entities. And as I say, I think the Dairy Board deals with some of that problem, but I just wonder, does it deal with all of them in terms of the cost base around how we process and what we process and the contracts that we sign with big food companies like the Danones and Nestle's of this world in terms of getting the best price we possibly can for our raw material. And I think that is a question that I think needs more debate. Finally, can I say that there's a risk that I have a responsibility to manage also, and that's policy risk, both in Ireland and across the European Union. There are quite a few countries in the European Union that would like to see dairy quotas remain, certainly until 2020 or even beyond it. And there are countries like Ireland who would like to see a much better managed soft landing in terms of ending the quota system as we currently have it. The truth is that what is likely to happen now is that we are going to see dairy quotas end in April 2015, but there will be little or no new policy initiatives around easing countries like Ireland out of quota. And so between now and then we have to manage super levy, we have to manage overproduction, and we have to make sure that we resist those politicians and those countries that actually want to see some kind of supply control post-quota, because I think that would be a disaster from an Irish perspective, given the investment and the focus that we have in expansion post-2015. But as I say, that's my job, but I'm sure I'll be held to account by your organisation and indeed many of the other farming organisations that watch every move that's made in this regard. But look, to finish, can I just say this, because I think the focus today probably has been on, understandably because of the theme of the conference, has been on risk, has been on the potential for failure, and the challenges that we have to overcome to try and minimise the likelihood of that happening. But actually, the overall impression I have of this industry is a hugely positive one. And everywhere I go, and next week it'll be to Japan, where I think we are now likely to see Irish beef entering that market, hopefully from next week on. Everywhere I go, people are talking about the Irish dairy story, and we have now an expectation, both at home and abroad, that is exciting, that has a huge opportunity attached to it. Yes, that has some challenges, but challenges that can be overcome. And collectively, as an industry and as a government, if we plan for that as we are, if we invest in that as we are, I think the returns can be really, really exciting for Irish agriculture and for Irish farmers and for the Irish cooperative movement, who will be at the heart of this transition and this hugely exciting growth story which will undoubtedly materialise. So thank you very much for having me today, and I hope it was useful.